Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Penn State football fans. Whenever you're listening to this, Penn State has a new offensive coordinator. This is the Blue White Breakdown presented by PennLive. Johnny McGonigal joining you for a little solo mission here, minutes after Penn State has, reportedly and PennLive has confirmed that Penn State is set to hire a new offensive coordinator. Andy Kotelnicki. We'll find out how to pronounce his last name correctly in the coming days. But the Kansas offensive coordinator is Penn State's new offensive play caller, the man that James Franklin is entrusting to develop Drew Aller, to work with Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, and to get this offense running after Mike Yurcich was fired following the Michigan loss in November. And this will be Penn State's sixth offensive coordinator after Yurcich was fired, the sixth offensive coordinator in James Franklin's what will be 11 seasons at Penn State. The news was first reported by the Athletics' Bruce Feldman on Thursday around 4:30, 4:15, 4:30, and so now we're recording this, pretty much right after the fact. And this was something that had been brewing for a couple of days. There were some flight aware, flight status checkers out there on Twitter trying to figure out if James Franklin had taken a flight from State College to Lawrence. However, he ultimately got in contact with Kansas's offensive coordinator. This is the guy. This is the guy that James Franklin has decided will take the reins of the offense and lead Penn State into the 2024 season, a very important season. No more divisions in the Big Ten, no Michigan on the schedule, Washington, USC, UCLA, and Oregon coming into the fold in the Big Ten, and a 12-team playoff. And Penn State has plenty of options to work with on offense. Didn't get the job done this season, specifically on the offensive side of the ball against Ohio State and against Michigan. But James Franklin is banking on Andy Kotelnicki to be the guy that unlocks this Penn State offense, that reinvigorates it, that reignites it, maybe similar to a way that Joe Moorhead did in 2016 and 2017. The hire doesn't necessarily come out of left field, despite Andy kind of keeping a relatively low profile. I mean, that kind of comes with the territory, I guess, of being the Kansas offensive coordinator. But Kansas has been good the last couple of seasons. Bowl eligible for the last 2 years, working under head coach Lance Leipold, who came over from Buffalo. That's where Andy ended up, or how he ended up in Lawrence. Really an interesting journey for Penn State's new offensive coordinator. He was a center at the D3 level in his playing career. Starting his play calling career at his alma mater, followed by 2 years in D2, and then won back-to-back national titles at the D3 level at Wisconsin Whitewater with Lance Leipold. Then went to Buffalo, spent half a decade there calling plays, and followed Leipold to Kansas. And Kansas is a basketball school. They are not a football school by any stretch of the imagination. So the hire of Leipold was an interesting one at the time, and one that has worked out for the Jayhawks. And him bringing Kotelnicki with him has really worked out well. I mean, they've been bowl eligible, like I mentioned, the last 2 years. Last year was their first bowl game since 2008. Kansas has averaged 35. They averaged 35 and a half points in 2022, 33 and a half points this year. A 14 and 11 combined record, which for if you're Penn State, that's grounds for being fired. If you're at Kansas, that's grounds for celebration. And Kansas fans will definitely be upset to lose their offensive coordinator because of what he's done with that offense over the last 2 years. The Athletics' Max Olson had a really good profile of Andy last year and described his offense and his scheme as a wildly multiple and constantly clever attack, one that prides itself above all else on creativity that causes confusion. If you guys have watched Kansas at all this year, you'll know what Max was writing about last year, what I'm talking about today. They've used pre-snap motions, movement, to great effect. They've spread the ball around. I think last year they had 5 running backs who were involved, a lot of receivers and pass catchers involved. They've generated a lot of chunk plays. They had 85 plays of 20 yards or more in 2022, which was the 8th most in the FBS. And you look at what Penn State's offense has done, or frankly has not done, this year. That's a big reason why Mike Yurcich was dismissed as Penn State's offensive coordinator. This is an offense that struggled not only in the passing game, but in the running game to create big plays. Nick Singleton, the guy who had 7 carries of 40 yards or more last year, despite that game against Michigan State, hasn't looked the same. The passing game just hasn't had much pop. You've had receivers, whether it's giving up on routes at times or miscommunications on routes, just, against the lower level of competition that Penn State has played, from UMass all the way up to, Maryland and Northwestern. We've seen the offense put up points and put up yards and look good. Look at what they did to Michigan State in the regular season finale at Ford Field last week. But, against Ohio State, against Michigan, combining for only 27 points, 3.8 yards per play, 5 of 30 on third down. That was that Michigan game was really the nail in the coffin for Mike Yurcich, and, set James Franklin on this quest to find yet another offensive coordinator. And I think he got a good one. And by all accounts, you look around, the reaction, from the national media, from those who cover college football, from a wider lens. This is a hire that's already getting, grade A marks, which is really good to see. If you're a Penn State fan, if you're James Franklin, and to be frank, the Mike Yurcich hire was also met with a lot of applause and a lot of praise. So we'll see, we'll see how it goes, right? We'll see how the 2024 season goes. But this is a hire that makes, I think, a lot of sense. It's a step up for Andy Kotelnicki to come to not only Penn State, but the Big Ten, a team that is, competing to be in the college football playoff. And obviously next year with the 12-team playoff in full effect, Penn State's goal will be to get there and to compete for a national title and compete for a Big Ten title. And we mentioned some of the pieces, and Drew Aller and even Bo Perbula. And I'm interested to see, what the Bo Perbula package is going to look like next year, because Kansas has used some triple option. I mentioned all the movements and the pre-snap motion and generating big plays and getting a lot of guys involved. They've used some triple option with their quarterback Jalen Daniels down there, and so don't be surprised if we see a little bit of more Bo Perbula next year. But I do think that he's worked with multiple quarterbacks as well this year specifically. Because Daniels got hurt, Jason Bean, their backup, got hurt, and they were still winning with a third-string quarterback. The competition level is obviously different in the Big 12 as compared to the Big 10, but you look at what Penn State has from a quarterback standpoint, from a running back standpoint, they're going to hit the portal really hard in trying to find wide receivers, and I still think they have enough guys, in that wide receiver room that you should feel a little confident, at least, based on the talent that they can develop and become pieces, even though it hasn't necessarily bore out that way in the 2023 season. That's something that James Franklin really has focused on the last couple of weeks when he's been asked about his wide receivers and about interim play callers, Jaywan Sider and Ty Howell, about how they've utilized those certain receivers. Me and Bob Flounders talked about that earlier this week on the Blue White Breakdown. And I think Andy Kotelnicki is the kind of guy that will come in, assess what he has, and just use those pieces, to the best of his ability and put them in position to, succeed. And as bad as the wide receiver room might have seemed this year and how doom and gloom it might have seemed, Penn State has more talent at wide receiver than Kansas does. And look at what, Andy's been able to do there in Lawrence over the last 2 seasons. So, a hire is done. He is the guy now. Penn State with James Franklin, with Andy Kotelnicki, and all of the members of the offensive coaching staff. They're going to be, like I mentioned, hitting the portal hard. Floating that out to obviously shoring up your recruiting classes, not only in 2024 but 2025 and 2026. But hitting the portal hard and making sure that you get a receiver or 2 or maybe even 3 in the door to help Drew Aller, reach his full potential. Because in the short term, that has to be one of the main goals. This is a 5-star quarterback who comes in with all the talent in the world. And while he had 23 touchdown passes and 1 interception in his first year as a starting quarterback, there were times, especially against Ohio State and Michigan, where it didn't look like Drew was that kind of uber talented player. And so I think a lot had to do with the pieces around him, and that includes the guy calling plays. And so Mike Yurcich is no longer here. It's the Andy Kotelnicki, and I will get that pronunciation down maybe as soon as next week if we're able to talk. The Penn State's new offensive coordinator once he becomes official here. Once Penn State sends something out. On Sunday, we'll be talking to James Franklin, most likely after whichever bowl Penn State ends up in. It's looking right now like it's going to be a New Year's Six bowl, and that those announcements will come at I think 2:15, 2:30 on Sunday, and then later that day, James will be made available to the media. If it's a New Year's Six bowl, even if it's not, he might talk to us as well. They might set something up there with the bowl, so we'll be able to ask him about Andy if he's official by then, which I would expect to be the case by then. So more to come on this, surely more to come on PennLive.com today, tomorrow, the next day. Again, whenever you're listening to this, just go on PennLive and we'll have you covered. Just an emergency pod here, just to say what's up and talk about Penn State's new offensive coordinator hire. Again, more to come in the future. That's Johnny McGonigal on the Blue White Breakdown.